The Judgment Day by James Weldon Johnson. In that great day, people, in that great day, God is going to rain down fire. God is going to sit in the middle of the air to judge the quick and the dead. Early one of these mornings, God is going to call for Gabriel, that tall, bright angel Gabriel, and God's going to say to him, Gabriel, blow your silver trumpet and wake the living nations. And Gabriel's going to ask him, Lord, how loud must I blow it? And God's going to tell him, Gabriel, blow it calm and easy. Then putting one foot on the mountaintop and the other in the middle of the sea, Gabriel's going to stand and blow his horn to wake the living nations. Then God's going to say to him, Gabriel, once more, blow your silver trumpet and wake the nations underground. And Gabriel's going to ask him, Lord, how loud must I blow it? And God's going to tell him, Gabriel, like 7 peals of thunder. Then the tall, bright angel Gabriel will put one foot on the battlements of heaven and the other on the steps of hell and blow that silver trumpet till he shakes old hell's foundations. And I feel old earth is shuddering. And I see the graves bursting. And I hear a sound, a blood-chilling sound. What is that sound I hear? It is the clicking together of dry bones. Bone to bone, the dry bones. And I see them coming out of the bursting graves and marching up from the valley of death, the army of the dead. And the living and the dead, in the twinkling of an eye, are caught up in the middle of the air before God's judgment bar. Oh, sinner, where will you stand in that great day when God's going to rain down fire? Oh, you gambling man, where will you stand? You whoremongering man, where will you stand? Liars and backsliders, where will you stand in that great day when God's going to rain down fire? And God will divide the sheep from the goats, the one on the right, the other on the left. And to them on the right, God's going to say, enter into my kingdom. And to those who've come through great tribulations and washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb, they will enter in, clothed in spotless white, with starry crowns upon their heads, and silver slippers on their feet, and harps within their hands. And 2 by 2, up and down the golden street, feasting on the milk and the honey, singing new songs of Zion, chattering with the angels all around the great white throne. And to them on the left, God's going to say, depart from me into everlasting darkness, down into the bottomless pit. And the wicked, like lumps of lead, will start to fall headlong for 7 days and nights. They'll fall plumb into the big, black, red, hot mouth of hell, belching out fire and brimstone. And their cries, like howling, yelping dogs, will go up with the fire and smoke from hell. But God will stop his ears. Too late, sinner, too late. Goodbye, sinner, goodbye. In hell, sinner, in hell. Beyond the reach of the love of God. and I hear a voice crying, crying, "Time shall be no more. Time shall be no more. Time shall be no more." And the sun will go out like a candle in the wind. The moon will turn to dripping blood. The stars will fall like cinders, and the sea will burn like tar, and the earth shall melt away and be dissolved. The sky will roll up like a scroll. With a wave of his hand, God will blot out time and start the wheel of eternity. Sinner, oh sinner, where will you stand in that great day when God is going to rain down fire? It took me all month to figure out what I wanted to read in honor of Black History Month, and I chose to read from God's Trombone by James Weldon Johnson. This is a collection of Negro sermons in verse. I highly recommend it. This is a copy that was given to me by my 11th and 12th grade, which for those of you outside the United States, that is the upper part of high school before you go to university or college. We performed this at my high school in my senior year. We performed all of God's Trombone, and the sermon that I performed was the one that I just read, The Judgment Day. So these are really special sermons, and this is not going to be a religious pitch. I've told y'all where I am. Southern Christian girl. So it's no secret. But even before I converted and became a Christian, these sermons held a special place with me. So just a little bit of a history lesson, a religious history lesson. Christianity as it's known today is very European in its origin and very Western and American in the way it's practiced today. But Christianity in its origin belongs to North Africa, the Middle East, and the more western side of Asia. That's where the heart of civilization began. That's where people came from before they were dispersed across the nations and across the continents. And that is also where Christ comes from. And a lot of times people, and I'm only speaking from a Black American perspective, but sometimes there are questions as to why Black Americans would hold so tightly to a religion that was used to subjugate them, to oppress them. Because if you look back and you read the justifications for slavery, a lot of times people twisted scripture to make justification for keeping people of different colors as slaves. They also use it as justification for subjugating women and children. Any religious text can be twisted to become something it was never meant to be. And that certainly happened with the Judeo-Christian Bible. But what we hold to, and why so many of the enslaved held to Christianity, wasn't even because of the influence of their slave masters and their owners. It was because it belonged to Africa, the Middle East, and Asia first. Christ's disciples, that's where they were from, and that is where the faith initially spread. To my knowledge, the oldest of the established Christian churches that still exist today is the Egyptian and the Ethiopian Coptic Christian Church. And if you've never been to one, you need to go. It's quite beautiful, actually. But there's a better chance that Christ was closer to my skin tone than a flaxen-haired shampoo model from the middle of Europe whose hands never knew a day of work. North Africa, the Middle East, the Persian Gulf area, the western part of Asia, the southern part of Europe, those are olive-toned and dark-skinned people. If you ever see someone who is ethnically Israeli and someone who is ethnically from one of the Arab states, they're kind of like right in between being European looking and being African looking. Like it's just a special blend of genetics. And even if you look at Egypt, there's actually a tribal group in Egypt that exists still today that some scientists believe are as close to what humans used to look like in the days of the Old Testament. A skin tone that no longer exists amongst us regular people. And I think I've talked about them before, like hair that's ringed like mine, not purple, but just a mixture of all the colors that natural hair color can be. Eyes that sparkle like diamonds. It's not blue, it's not green, it's not brown. It's its own unique color. It's like, wow, this is what people were before the influence of outside forces that unfortunately used religion in a negative way. And I choose to celebrate Black History Month on the last day because it took me the whole month to pick this. With this because I think these sermons are important. They connect me to my history as a Black American, and they remind me what the people who came before me went through, and yet were still able to keep their faith because circumstances are no excuse to lose one's faith. Because the truth of the world is hardship exists. Hardship is promised. None of us get away from it. Is it relative? Absolutely. What a millennial in modern America would call a hardship is going to be very different than what my parents would have called hardships and what my grandparents would have. And even not looking back into the past, if I look to the other side of the planet, there are places where people hardship means not eating every day or choosing which one of your family members gets to go to school, which one of your children you're going to feed today. So hardship is 100% relative, but these are inspiring sermons because even through being enslaved, through being brought away from their homeland to be nothing but servants and slaves to other people, there was still faith in God. And the sermons were important enough to capture in poetic verse so that they could be passed down to the next generation and the next generation and the next generation. Remember where you come from. And as you remember it, celebrate how far you come. Because there was a time when if I wanted to go to church, if I was even allowed into the church where people who didn't look like me went, I had to sit where they wouldn't have to look at me because, house of the Lord is supposed to be pure and dark skin's not pure. Baptist, I'm looking at you. But then at the same time, it reminds me to celebrate how far we've come. I think that's part of the motion of civil rights sometimes that we forget. Yes, there is always work to be done. There's work to be done everywhere. Where victories happen, we must celebrate. This is a published book of artistic works celebrating sermons captured from enslaved Negroes over time. And it is a classic of English literature now. In a lot of schools, this is mandatory reading. It is the story of my people and their faith told in verse. And I find it to be absolutely beautiful, and I greatly appreciate it. And do that. Find out about your culture. One thing about being American, and I can imagine that countries like Canada and Australia might have the same issue, because we exist in our countries as the result of people leaving other countries. Sometimes it's hard to trace back where you come from. I'll never know where my family originally hails from. I do know my great-grandfather, who I knew as a child, a young child, he was the son of a slave. He died at like 98. When I was like, I had to be 5 or 6 when Pawpaw died. So if he was 98 at that time, that would have meant he was born, golly, in about 1860, 1870, somewhere in there. I'm doing quick. I was an English major. Don't ask me to math. It's not my thing. But he had things to say to me that I'm very glad that I got to know him. But I don't know anything about my family past him. And I probably never will. You can do genetic testing to figure out, possibly where you come from. But unless everybody in Africa does it, I'm not going to know what family I hail from Africa. For all I know, I got a whole pack of relatives over there that I know nothing about. And they know nothing about me. But then again, the other side of what's happened, I can only speak from a place of I can't speak for all nations and creeds. But another thing that's happened with Black Americans, the reason we're called Black is because we are so far removed from our African roots. After being here so long, we're different than Native Africans, from people from African nations. So we went from being Africans to dark skinned, words I can't say, and now we're just black. We're our own thing. We're Black Americans. And that's where a lot of the tension, I think, sometimes comes from in my country, is we're not immigrants. We didn't show up here, on a boat for the most part to stake our claim in America. We're not conquerors of this nation. We were literally brought here to serve and to be enslaved. And laws actually had to be passed to even declare that people that looked like me were human. But now, people that look like me are classic American English literature, studied in schools and by scholars, and this piece of my people's history lives on forever. And I hope you go and find this book, God's Trombone by James Weldon Johnson. And it's not big, because a good sermon doesn't have to be 6 hours. It's not a big book, but it's an impactful book. And I just wanted to celebrate Black history by celebrating something that reminds me of why I have the faith that I have, where it came from, and why my people cling so strongly to it, because it is our religion, and I'm very proud of it. So thank you for coming along with me on this little dive into celebrating Black history on the last day of Black History Month. We'll get back to our regularly scheduled programs on the morrow. Bye, friends. See you in the next one.